Hello everyone, and welcome to the second event in our Future Ready series, Impostor Syndrome, Strategies for Career Confidence, where we'll cover what imposter syndrome is, why it happens, and share practical strategies to successfully manage it. We're excited to be with you today, our alumni and friends around the world, to deliver this event. My name is Sharon Homan-James. I am Alumni Engagement Officer at Heriot-Watt University. Our alumni team is here to support, connect with and collaborate with our global community of over 173,000 alumni in over 190 countries. We deliver events, activities and resources that support you with your careers and endeavours after graduating, and to help you keep in touch with the university and fellow alumni. This event is being recorded and will last 1 hour, and we'll share a link to the recording afterwards. I'd like to highlight the question and answer section. Please feel free to pop in any questions and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end. Thank you all for being here, and I will now pass on to Sarah Innes, Careers Consultant at Heriot-Watt University, who will introduce you to our speakers today.
Thanks very much, Sharon. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's Sarah. I'm the Careers Consultant working out of our Edinburgh campus, and I work with Heriot-Watt graduates. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all today. This is the latest in our Future Ready series. The series is all about supporting the professional success of Heriot-Watt graduates. So today's session is going to be a chance to sort of dive into the topic of imposter syndrome. I know it's something that a lot of us experience, but we rarely talk about it. Whether you're early on in your career or if you're really well established, many of us will have experienced those feelings of self-doubt that creep into your life and hold us back in our careers. So this session is all about building knowledge, building confidence, and giving you practical, actionable tips that you can use to manage imposter syndrome when it shows up. And by the end, we hope you'll leave with a really strong understanding and lots of strategies that you can use straight away in your professional life. I'm delighted today to introduce our expert speakers. Jenna Robertson has had a remarkable career. It spans chemical engineering, creative performance, research, leadership coaching, with a focus on regenerative leadership and creativity. Jenna is the founder and CEO of leadership development organisation Gaia's Evolution, as well as being an alumnus from our Edinburgh campus. We also have Dr. Lucy Bolton, and Lucy is an associate professor in business psychology from our Dubai campus, where she's global director of our taught postgraduate psychology programs. Lucy has a particular interest in imposter syndrome, and she brings a huge wealth of knowledge to this topic. So we are very grateful to have you both here today. Just a quick reminder to keep popping your questions into the Q&A as you go along. At the end of the session, I will facilitate some questions, and we'll try and leave plenty of time for that. But without further ado, I will hand you over to Lucy and Jenna.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Sarah, and it's great to be here speaking to everyone. So let's start with this very scientific academic pie chart showing something fascinating. So if you take a close look at this, it shows us that 100% of us have imposter syndrome. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, not me, well, that's probably your imposter syndrome talking. But here's the truth. Almost everybody feels imposter syndrome at some point. CEOs, professors, Nobel Prize winners, and yes, even the person who made this pie chart. But here's the reassuring part. Imposter syndrome is not a sign of weakness. And that's one of the key messages that Jenna and I want to get across today in our session. It's actually a sign that you care about doing something well and that you want to make a difference. So today we're going to unpack what imposter syndrome really is, why it shows up, looking at the psychology behind it, and most importantly, how we can address it. So by the end of this session, we hope that you'll see that feeling like an imposter doesn't mean you are one. It means that you're human, and that's something that we all share. So if you've ever thought I'm the only one who feels like a fraud, let us introduce you to some very famous company. Now, these faces might look confident and accomplished. I'm sure you've heard of most of these, but behind the scenes, they've admitted to feeling exactly what we're talking about today. And what's powerful about some of these quotes from Albert Einstein, Michelle Obama, we have a representative from the Disability Rights Forum, is that they, hang on, the lights have just gone out in this room. They remind us that success doesn't erase self-doubt. Okay, so let's hear from Viola Davis.
So I know the language of the artist, and the language of the artist is someone's going to find me out. I may not be as great as people think I am.
It's classic imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah.
They're going to find me out.
And anybody who even wants to be great has that. Anybody, any filmmaker, any writer, any actor. But what it does is, of course, you have to have a healthy sort of approach to it. You have to recognize it for what it is. You have to keep it in its place. But what it does on a healthy level, it keeps you humble and it keeps you working.
Mm-hmm. Some really powerful statements there by Viola Davis. As you look at these examples, you can think about what it means that people at the top of their field still question themselves. And she made some key points there that we want to recognize these feelings and also keep it in check, which does come with time and experience that we'll talk about. And also these feelings can keep us humble. Okay, so if they feel it, maybe it's not about capability, it's about mindset. And these extraordinary figures remind us that even though these people have broken barriers, reshaped cultures, overcome prejudice, they have still felt like frauds. So if imposter syndrome can coexist with achievement, the real question becomes, how do we manage it so it doesn't hold us back? And that's what we want to help you explore in this session. So I'll let Jenna come in and say hello and run through what we'll be talking about.
Hello, thank you so much for that introduction, Lucy. I loved the pie charts. I'm saying hello to you and giving you this presentation today from Australia in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a privilege to be here. Here is an outline of our session today. And we're already underway. I'm going to begin with actually just some moments to ground, to have a little bit of space and connect a little bit with our inner worlds, given that that's really what we're exploring today. Lucy's going to really dive into a psychological lens of understanding imposter syndrome. And then I'm going to dive into some other lenses so that we can begin to understand it with different layers and more nuance. And then we'd like to offer some strategies to come through imposter phenomenon. And we're also going to share some of our own stories from our own lives with the intention of really illustrating that even if we're teaching or educating about this topic, it's definitely a phenomenon that Lucy and I have both experienced in our own lives as well. So let us begin as we consider our inner worlds in this presentation. Many of us live busy lives, so if you want, and if it feels good, I really want to invite you to just take a little moment. You may like to close your eyes if that feels safe and good for you, and just begin to connect with your inner world. And maybe just begin to observe and notice what kinds of thoughts are already present as we begin to approach this topic. What's happening in your body in response to the topic? What's present there? If you like, you can just take 3 deep breaths while you keep that attention on what's happening in your inner world, in your mind and your body. The first big breath in now, I'll do it with you. And a long breath out. Sensing your body as you take a second breath in. And a long breath out. And paying attention to any thoughts present as you take your third breath in. And a final long breath out. Thank you. Lucy.
Thank you for that, Jenna. Really useful to ground people before we think about these topics. So we would like to hear from you. I'm going to read out a few statements that actually you can see on the slide, and if any of them resonate with you, these are going to be put in the in the Q&A box. And when they're posted, if you do resonate with it, please can you give it a thumbs up? Okay, so let's see how many of us have felt some of these things, because the chances are that you are not alone. So, statement number 1. It's hard for me to accept compliments or praise about my accomplishments. If you can resonate with this, if you felt this, then please do give it a thumbs up in the Q&A box. There we go. Oh, thank you, Jen. Sorry, it hadn't updated for me. Okay, so with this statement, you might think about the example of if you've delivered a successful presentation or a piece of work and your manager says, fantastic job, but you respond with things like, oh, it was nothing, anyone could have done it, instead of accepting the praise. We're getting a few likes there. Thank you for sharing. A couple of people feel this way. Okay, let's pop statement number 2 up. I'm afraid people important to me may find out I'm not as capable as they think I am. So you may have taken on a new role, you may have been promoted to lead a new team, but you constantly worry that your boss will realize you're not as skilled as they assumed, and you actually tell yourself that as well. Okay, we're getting a lot of likes. For comment number 1 coming up, 33 people have agreed with about not being able to accept compliments. Okay, we'll put the third one up. At times, I feel my success has been due to some kind of luck. A very common one. I've felt this quite a lot. So you might land a big project and think, I was just in the right place at the right time, rather than actually acknowledging your skills or capability for taking on the project. Okay, so some people resonating with that as well. The numbers are going up. Okay, number 4, I can give the impression that I'm more competent than I really am. So you may feel that you use confident language and jargon perhaps to sound knowledgeable, even though you're still figuring things out behind the scenes. You may agree to take on a task that's outside of your expertise and act like you're assured, but actually you're Googling how to do it later and feeling very anxious. So there's 4 statements that we've put up there. So I think statement number 1 seems to be the most popular, or the one that most people resonate with. It's hard for me to accept compliments or praise. It's very common in high achievers, which we will come back to. 31 people gave a thumbs up to the second comment. We've had 22 for the third. Where's the and the last one, 24. Okay, that went up quite high. I can give the impression that I'm more competent than I really am. Now, these statements have been taken from the Clance Imposter Phenomenon Scale, which is one of the key measures that was developed by Dr. Clance, the researcher who first coined the term imposter syndrome, which we'll come on to. So if you do look into this, you can find the full all the statements in the measure. But it's a useful way for us to think about how to recognize some of the signs of imposter syndrome. So yeah, interesting. We can see that a lot of these are common experiences that are linked to imposter feelings. So coming on to break down the definition of imposter phenomenon. Originally, the concept of imposter phenomenon was introduced in 1978 by Dr. Pauline Clance, who developed that measure, and Dr. Susan Imes, who studied high-achieving women who were feeling like frauds despite clear evidence of competence. And this was actually women in academia. So they were looking at faculty, staff, and also students as well back in the late 70s. Now, these women often attributed success to luck, timing, or other people's overestimation rather than their own ability. Now, over time, the term imposter syndrome became popular in media and in the self-help area, but syndrome can sound clinical, like a diagnosis. It can imply that something is wrong with you, when in reality, we know that this is a very common human experience. So today, researchers prefer, and Jenna and I prefer, to use the term imposter phenomenon because it reflects reality. And we've put the definition down here on the slide, on the bottom right of the slide. This is a common human experience. It is not a mental disorder. A phenomenon is simply something observed and studied. It's a fact, not a flaw. So the shift back from syndrome to phenomenon matters, and it moves the conversation away from pathology towards understanding our own growth, our own identity, and the context that we are in. It's also less stigmatizing that comes with the term syndrome. You're not broken. You're responding to normal pressures many people share. So what began as a study of women's experiences has grown into a broader understanding of how our social expectations, organizational cultures, and biases can make capable people doubt themselves. Now, coming on to some of the academic definitions and looking a bit more into what imposter phenomenon is, at its heart, as we've mentioned, it's really doubting your accomplishments and fearing exposure as a fraud, even when there is clear evidence that you are competent at what you're doing. Now, notice that emphasis. The fear exists and persists despite evidence of success. So you could be getting positive feedback, but you constantly, you still think that you are a fraud or you're not really capable. And that's what makes this phenomenon and the feelings associated with it so powerful and yet so frustrating. Imposter phenomenon, describes someone who fails to recognize their success as being earned, as we've mentioned before, often putting it down to timing, luck, or other people. And there's an academic definition there as well by Al-Lawati and colleagues, a persistent internalized sense of intellectual deceit and self-doubt. So some negative terms here. But Langford and Clance, back in the 90s, they suggested that these feelings and the phenomenon often arises in response to insecurity, self-doubt, and the pressure to live up to an idealized self-image, which brings in aspects around the society that we live in and the context and job pressures. So with this phenomenon, there is difficulty in someone's ability to internalize their accomplishments. Now, this lack of self-confidence that comes with the imposter feelings can feed stress, and you may be perfectionists yourself. I know I am, but individuals can then try to minimize these feelings by seeking perfection and working longer and harder, which has its own consequences. Another point I just want to add here is about social media. In a world where social media is prevalent, where we are constantly comparing ourselves to highlight reels, these can reinforce feelings of inadequacy and the belief that our own success isn't genuine. So in our pursuit of likes, shares, and comments, this becomes a measure of worth, and it can push us to try to maintain an idealized image, even when it doesn't reflect reality in our personal and professional lives. So not just Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I'm not going to pretend that I know what the new social media platforms that the younger generation are using are, but LinkedIn obviously is used in a more professional context. And sometimes we're starting to get that now in LinkedIn, where people are promoting themselves so much, and it has its benefits, but also it can also make other people not feel as competent or up there if we're always seeing these highlight reels. And the psychological consequences are, of course, that this cycle then widens the gap between who we are and who we think we should be. becoming a vicious cycle, and that's where it can intensify self-doubt and it can fuel these phenomenon feelings that come with these imposter feelings. So in short, the phenomenon that was described in 1978 is now magnified by our digital culture as well, which makes it even harder to feel authentic and confident in our job roles and in our achievements. So put simply, we feel uneasy, we doubt our ability. It can feel like an internal battle as well. We convince ourselves that we're frauds, fearing that others will find us out. And we can then question whether we actually belong in the spaces that we've worked hard to enter. Now, I'll touch on some of these points because time is flying already, some of the next points, but Jenna will come back to some intersectionality issues. So the next slide. Most studies do actually show us that over 70% of people experience imposter feelings at least once in their life. And a lot of the papers I looked at even were going up to the 80 or 90%. Now, this can depend on population and measurement tools too. So typically in high-performing sectors like medicine, academia, and competitive businesses, as well as students, they're often finding that they're experiencing feelings of imposter syndrome. In fact, I came across a podcast this week, a whole podcast on imposter syndrome in medical students, which is quite interesting. So yeah, typically in these high-performance sectors, it is more common. It does affect all genders. So even though a lot of the roots of this phenomenon come from studies with women, and women often report higher levels of imposter syndrome, especially in male-dominated fields, it is actually experienced by all genders. Now, men do experience it too, but they tend to underreport imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon feelings. Social norms around confidence and success can often make it harder for men to openly acknowledge these feelings, even when they're present. Research does suggest that men often feel pressure to appear self-assured and in control, which can make acknowledging imposter thoughts feel risky or stigmatizing. Okay. And I know, like I said, Jenna will come back to some of these intersectionality issues. I've mentioned that it's linked to perfectionism, high expectations. Research further highlights that low self-confidence and undervaluing our achievements does not only fuels these imposter emotions, but can also aggravate mental health challenges. If you experience anxiety or depression, these can create that cycle as well. So understanding these patterns is essential to therefore reduce long-term psychological distress. Also, just note that people can have high self-esteem overall, but still feel like imposters in specific contexts, such as a new role, high pressure environment, or when comparing themselves to others. But the good news is that these feelings often lessen with age and our development. Now, a number of studies have actually found that looking at imposter phenomenon over time, symptoms decline notably with age. There was one study I found that actually said over the age of 39, very specific. And there's some research, there's a good article by professors at MIT, Massachusetts, Sloan Institute, that they did a comprehensive review on imposter phenomenon and found that contrary to belief, imposter phenomenon is fluid. So it's not a fixed trait within us. People can experience imposter thoughts in some contexts, but not others. And you may perhaps reflect on where you have felt these feelings before. So it can come across a number of situations, and perhaps particularly in your case, I know this is an alumni talk, so you may be transitioning from university or recently transitioned into the world of work. And this natural inattention often does show up during transitions when you're moving into new roles or moving into unfamiliar spaces. So there's a few points on the next slide about how to recognize this. There's some of the common behaviors and thought patterns that are linked to imposter phenomenon, some that I've already mentioned, this persistent self-doubt, fear of being found out as a fraud. Perhaps when you were doing your exams at university, if you did well, you might have just thought you got lucky on the exams. Attributing success to luck, timing, or others. We've mentioned that one as well. Dismissing praise, downplaying your accomplishments, That reinforces the cycle of self-doubt. If you've been told you've done a great job on something and you just say, oh no, it was nothing. As I touched on before about this perfectionism, to compensate, some people tend to overwork or strive for perfectionism to prove their competence. Now, this can be risky as it can lead to more stress and burnout. So if you've ever found yourself spending hours refining a presentation that's excellent, but you just keep going, keep working on it so to avoid criticism, or taking on extra tasks to prove worth, even when your workload is already overwhelming. I've been guilty of all of these in my career. But on the flip side, rather than the overworking and burnout, some people may actually avoid new challenges or visibility because they fear failure or exposure. So you may decline a speaking opportunity or a conference or event because you fear being exposed as less knowledgeable. You may avoid certain roles or promotions because you feel you're not ready, even when others believe that you are. So a lot of this, as you may start to notice, is about our own perception as opposed to our capability. And I'll come on to understanding why our brain plays tricks on us. So let's start to take a psychological lens on why imposter feelings happen. So on the next slide, we can see that our brains are wired with what's called negativity bias. Unfortunately, we pay more attention to negative information than positive. So if you've had a performance review and your boss runs through various things, you could have a lot of praise, positive feedback, and then there's one criticism. You could walk out of there just remembering that critical comment. This was useful for survival, which I'll let Jenna talk more about. But in modern workplaces, it means that we can often fixate on our flaws and mistakes instead of our successes. So these are cognitive distortions. They are systematic thinking errors that shape how we interpret events, and they intensify our imposter syndrome. I like to use this quote. I use this quote with my students and in my lectures by Epictetus, an ancient philosopher. But people are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. So the truth is that these are distortions, not facts. And our inner critic is coming out and telling us these things. So these thinking errors are very common. You may recognize all or nothing thinking, for example. If I'm not perfect, I'm a failure. Have you done a presentation and you stumble on one question and then you conclude that the entire thing was a disaster? Again, I've been guilty of that in the past. Discounting the positive, as I mentioned, you ignore the positive comments, focus on the negatives. What about catastrophizing? You miss a small deadline and you immediately fear that your career's over and you've lost your job. A lot of us are guilty of doing that. Or overgeneralizing, drawing sweeping statements or conclusions from one event. If you make one typo in an email to perhaps a senior person, you think you're terrible at communication and your reputation is ruined. We tend to have these thoughts that come in. So again, when we succeed and we do things well, we often discount these achievements. So I think it's really important to start understanding our thinking and how we can reframe things. I often tell my students when we're talking about coaching and thinking errors to put your thoughts, feelings, emotions out on the table in front of you and to start to map and think about how they are affecting your behaviors. And we can start to identify these negative traps. And I'll pass over to Jenna to explore some of these points a bit more.
Thank you so much, Lucy. If anyone needs to take a breath again, because it's a lot.
Information overload.
For some of you, it might... lots of beautiful information. For some of you, it might be relatively easy to listen to. And if there are any of you there who are just finding it challenging in any way, just an invitation for you to take a breath and also to extend some compassion to you. There's a huge storm happening outside my window right now. I'm really hoping my internet doesn't cut off. I'm sure it'll be fine. So we're halfway, and we're going to enter a few different worlds of knowledge now and begin to understand imposter syndrome from some different lenses. We're beginning with well, we've just heard the psychological lens, exquisitely articulated by Lucy. And we're now going into evolutionary biology. So let's, as the lightning is now reminding me, remember that we are on this beautiful planet Earth, and this body that we're all sitting in, this earth that we all find ourselves in, as well as our inner experience, is a result of 3.8 billion years of evolution. I'm slowing down as I say that to give us time to get our imaginations and our heads around this huge number. 3.8 billion years of evolution. And so there is an intelligence in how our bodies are designed and how they operate, because it's 3.8 billion years old. 3.8 nature has had 3.8 billion years of research and development to refine these beautiful bodies and systems that we inhabit. And so from this lens, we can say that imposter phenomenon is an ancient, intelligent, and adaptive impulse to attune, improve, and navigate social and ecological systems. It's a different way of imagining it, isn't it? My key takeaway there is it's intelligent. And from a neurobiological lens, we are going to dive into the nervous system, deeply connected to the thoughts and all of what Lucy has shared. So our nervous system, this photograph on the left, this is really exquisite network of nerves and cells. They detect, process, and respond to internal and external information, like the thunder outside my door. and it's also involved in coordinating movement, sensation, and thought. So these psychological experiences that we're having are connected to what's happening in this nervous system as well. It's regulating our bodies. It's an incredible, beautifully intelligent system designed by nature. The nervous system is really in the driving seat and operated by what's called neuroception. And so neuroception it's an unconscious awareness that sits behind our mind. So it's switched on for all of us right now. Switched on for me, Lucy, all of you. You're sensing me, you're sensing Lucy, you're sensing your environment, and whether it's safe, whether there may be some risks or dangers around, and even whether there may be threat to life. This system is amazing. It's always on, and it acts without the mind. You might think about a situation, maybe even if there's a loud bang or a scary noise, or sometimes in movies they have these moments where there's a really scary moment that's deliberately crafted, and you can feel sometimes your body responding really quick to that external stimulus. This is your neuroception and your nervous system acting. So it's related to imposter phenomenon because the neuroception's on all the time. It's an ancient technology, and it's informing the nervous system operating mode. And it's deciding whether or not we're safe. Like maybe we're with our loved ones, we're having a barbecue, or we're feeling really comfortable, then we're probably going to be in safety mode. And in this mode, our negativity bias that Lucy mentioned is sort of muted or softened. But it might be that, for example, we're in a situation like a new work environment where the stakes might be quite high, or we could be in a really difficult, challenging relational situation with colleagues or with family. It could be any sort of danger, and if that's happening, it'll be that your neuroception will be sensing it. The nervous system will be preparing to protect you from that danger. It's also, of course, sensing for life threats, which is probably another presentation for another day. But when we have this danger activated, and that might feel like your heart starts to beat a little bit faster, you might be shaking a little bit, your breath might get a little bit more shallow. Think about maybe before you do some public speaking or a performance or a job interview. This is when your nervous system is potentially trying to protect you in this danger state. And so what's happening in the mind during that, it's connected with the thoughts. Negativity bias is amplified. It gets bigger. We're looking for risks. We're looking for these threats, and they become bigger in our minds. And so imposter phenomenon is related to this system. We experience imposter phenomenon in this danger state. So from this lens, we can describe it as a protective activation of our nervous system's threat detection circuits, which feels like heightened vigilance, social sensitivity, and self-monitoring. It's trying to keep you safe. Because maybe in the evolution of our species, the need to belong, the need to be respected, the need to be safe have been part of our evolution as a species. And the system's trying to do that for you. It's trying to help you. We're going into another different world now, into more about the outer world. And so through an intersectional lens. For those who haven't heard this term, I've just got a definition here. So intersectionality is the concept that different aspects of a person's identity, there's race, gender, sexuality, body ability, class, where you live in the world, whether you're a migrant, these can all overlap and they create unique human experiences. It's giving the validation and the nuance that different people with different identities experience the world in different ways. And so this has an impact on imposter phenomenon. So for me, as a white woman from Scotland living in Australia in my 40s, able-bodied, I have a particular lived experience. And I may experience imposter syndrome in a particular way that may be very different to a woman of color who's based in Amsterdam, who is in their 30s, for example. And so this is really a validation that it's not the same for everyone. The experience varies. There is nuance. And this is, it's the whole point in this is to validate that and to highlight that. It's also a way of acknowledging that the outer conditions that we find ourselves in, whether it's work, family, and different cultures, they have an impact on how we experience imposter syndrome. So another definition is it may also be considered a systemic relational phenomenon where a person's emerging potential becomes obscured by the inequities and power dynamics in the outer environment. We're going to go a little bit deeper into that now when we consider it from a cultural lens. So with this little diagram here, if we zoom in on the you here, this is us, our human experience, and this is the little diagram of the nervous system. And so this is kind of a representation of our inner world experience, which doesn't happen in isolation. It is, of course, happening in response to outer stimulus. And it can absolutely be, the experience can be different depending on what it's responding to. So for example, if you're in a team or you're joining a new team or organization, their culture that you're sensing, that your neuroception is absolutely sensing in every microsecond, is going to have an impact on how your inner world is is being and your experience. So you may find that some cultures or leaders, they could be kind of perfectionistic, looking for everything to be quite beautiful. You may be sensing some inequities. You may be sensing microaggressions. You may be sensing a real hierarchical power. And of course, there are beautiful cultures and teams out there where the imposter phenomenon may not be as strong, but these kinds of cultural characteristics tend to be amplifying the experience of imposter phenomenon. And similarly, if we zoom out further into our society, and let's call that a systemic lens, that we live within what can be called a colonial paradigm of culture. And as we know, within that are weaved systems of oppression like racism, ableism, white supremacy, homophobia. These kinds of things are sadly part of our culture in Western culture at this current time. And what we see is that this systemic culture finds its way into teams and organizational cultures. And so what may seem like an imposter phenomenon that's just happening within our minds, it can even be extended into organizational culture and even societal culture. It may not be something that is only for you to consider. It may be that the outer culture has something to consider as well about how it actually initiates imposter phenomenon. Excuse me. So from this lens, imposter phenomenon can be amplified by cultural pressures and inequities, and sometimes appearing and being experienced more strongly in contexts where we have this bias and marginalization and exclusion. And again, for anyone who's finding this difficult to listen to, it is difficult to listen to, and I just want to validate that. And if you need to take a breath and take care of yourself in any way, then please do. So if we try to weave all of these lenses together, and there are so many more lenses, Lucy and I could share more, but we just have a short time, then we have this integrated definition that imposter phenomenon is a human experience of self-doubt, shaped by these things: mind, body, identity, culture, and even social context. It's an intelligent inner tension, and it can be a signal for personal growth within, or it can also be a reflection of an outer culture. Breathe that in and breathe it out if you so wish.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. Shall I come back in here now that we've explored some more in depth and about what imposter phenomenon looks like, why it happens to us as humans? We can start to shift to something practical as well, to think what you can ask yourself when these thoughts show up. Now, the goal isn't to eliminate self-doubt completely. That would be unrealistic. Instead, it's about recognizing the pattern, reframing it, and then responding in a way that can support growth rather than fear. So these questions are designed to help you pause, reflect, and move from "I'm a fraud" to "I'm learning and growing." And self-doubt does come with that, and we appreciate not everyone enters a job, for example, it's super experienced, knowing everything. But these questions can guide you through noticing what's happening. They can help calm you and reframe limiting beliefs and move them hopefully into more empowering truths. So point number 1 is around noticing and naming. So thinking about what triggered this feeling. What exactly are you feeling right now? Typical feelings obviously are self-doubt, anxiety, stress, fear. But what triggered it? Was it a meeting, a comment, a deadline? And can you acknowledge that this is a normal response to a challenge? It's not a flaw. It's an invitation for growth and a culture shift. It's gone up in this room again. Okay, let's come back on. Okay. The next step would be about reframing and integrating. So how is that negativity bias coming in? What limiting belief is driving this? And this is where you can start to question yourself, or you can do this through coaching. I'm not good enough, or I'll fail. Start to think about the terms that you're using and identify what could be more of a balanced truth here. Again, shifting the words that you're using, reframing it, and shifting your mindset to looking more at I'm learning and I'm growing, or I've succeeded before. And journaling and things can help with this, where you start to identify your successes and your achievements. And also, if I believed that truth, how would I act differently? And thinking about identifying that inner critic. The next step is about leaning into growth through action and thinking about that brave step that you can take. So asking for feedback, that could be a brave action. Speaking up in a meeting, applying for a promotion or a new job role. And reflect if you feel safe enough to take that step. And if not, that's still okay. But what support do you perhaps need? And that's where you can think about the support around you and engage support. Who could you reach out to? A friend, a family member, a colleague, a mentor, someone who you can talk through these feelings with, and help. They can help understand, help you process some of these things, or what community or network can help you feel that you belong. And finally, there's reflect and recalibrate. So after taking action, what feels different now? What did you learn about yourself? And what's the next step for growth? Where has growth taken place? And as you work through these questions, you can remember that imposter thoughts are not facts. As we mentioned, they're signals. They're often showing up when you're stretching into new territory, which means that growth is happening. So by asking yourself these questions, you create the space to respond intentionally instead of reacting from fear. And the key takeaway is that you don't have to do this alone. Support, reflection, and that brave action are all part of the process here. Now, Jenna's going to come back and revisit these steps, but I'll take a few moments we both want to share our experiences. Yeah, so I'll reflect on some parts of my career.
Thank you, Lucy. Also, just practically, we have about 10 minutes left, so you and I will have to be quite brief, I think, in our storytelling. So, Lucy, now we find you at this point in your career where you're an associate professor, you're lecturing very often, you're using your voice often. Was it always easy for you?
No, and being conscious of time, I'm going to really try and summarize this quickly. I've been working in academia since 2009, but mainly started off doing research and consultancy and trained as a business psychologist. Unknown, never thinking I would be good enough to be a lecturer or an academic or do a PhD or that stuff. It wasn't on the cards, mainly because I doubted my competence. But when I was working at a university over about 10 years ago, I was asked to do maternity cover for a whole course on a postgraduate program. My first reaction was panic, felt completely inadequate, and my inner voice was saying, you're not good enough. They only asked you because there's no one else around. Now, I'm working in academia, surrounded by super smart individuals. So I just didn't always see myself as one of them. And that constant self-doubt and fear of being found out was there. But I took on the opportunity And the truth was that I did have the capability to do this. I had done some lecturing. I supported colleagues on their courses, and the department believed in me. And although I didn't know at the time, reframing meant reminding myself I was chosen because I can deliver, not because there was no one else. And I only started to see that later on. So yeah, I saw it as a threat initially. But yeah, my brave action was about saying yes, showing up, even when I felt terrified of leading a whole course. I prepared thoroughly. I asked questions. I allowed myself to learn as I went along. And even though I was scared of negative feedback, I would go through meticulously the students' feedback. I'd ask colleagues for feedback. I'd watch back recordings of myself as well to see what I could change or improve on. So that confirms that I do have a growth mindset and being reflective, and I wanted to improve myself. So by the end of the course, I mean, now I guess I feel proud, but I didn't at the time so much. But the feelings of inadequacy, they don't vanish overnight, do they? But I learned that imposter phenomenon can thrive in silence. And I think now talking about it, reframing it, you know, if any thoughts like that creep in, I remind myself, you've done this before and you can do it again. And then the outcome was that I was actually asked then to take on that course, full time. I took over that course and led it going forward, and then gradually got more into lecturing, and now do full-time lecturing in Dubai. So yeah, it was, looking back, I wish I hadn't had those feelings, but I was very much attributing getting the experience due to luck or just no one else available. I had fear of being exposed as a fraud. I was massively over preparing and having anxiety before tasks and things like that. But yeah, so these are just some images of me back in Leeds. I couldn't find any of me lecturing, but when I was back in the UK. So that's my story when I felt feelings of being an imposter. So should we move over to you, Jenna, to share some of your feelings? Can you think back to a situation where you felt out of your depth and had feelings of imposter phenomenon?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us, Lucy. I appreciate it. I thought about, the people on this call, and perhaps there are people who are newly graduated. And so I went back to that time in my life to think about a short story to share, which is, this is me 2 years out of university. I was a chemical engineering graduate, doing very different work back then. It was a commissioning and startup job that I had gotten. It's my first expat position. I was working for Shell at the time. And I had this story in my head that I only got the job because it's in a very difficult remote location and they couldn't find anyone else. And I think that there was a partial truth to that story, but I do remember that feeling when I stepped into the environment. It was very remote. It was very difficult. I was one of very few foreign females who were there on a site with thousands of people. And I was 24 years old and put in charge of leading a team of men on the field who weren't particularly friendly. So I'll just leave it at that. But essentially how I was able to find my way through that was to acknowledge the feelings at the time, but lean into something which I could believe about myself, which was I knew that I was curious, and I knew that I learned well, and I knew that if I listened and was curious and asked questions, eventually I would be finding my way through this job, and that is indeed what happened. And the other thing I just wanted to share with everyone is that over the years, this skill set of putting myself in new, even completely randomly different situations. In my case, I went into the arts, and then into coaching and leadership development, and then into planetariums. And so my career has taken me through very, very different places where I've had to over and over again practice this skill of overcoming imposter phenomenon. And so I just want to acknowledge how working with this inner tension can really unlock a beautiful life. So At this point, maybe I'll check in with Sarah, because I think Sarah, I think we have 5 minutes left. Is that true? And we might want to go to questions. I'm not sure we've got time for the rest of the content.
We absolutely do have some questions. Thank you so much to both of you. Yeah, it would be great to share the rest of the content after the session. But you've given us such a strong grounding. We've got a couple of questions here. One, which is, I think, sort of very eloquently put. You've been asked, with the imposter phenomenon, there seems to be an implicit assumption that we're indeed competent. But what if certain aspects of our fears are actually true to some degree? So how does one internally reconcile the valid and the invalid fears? So I don't know who wants to take that.
I can start to answer this, and then Jenna might want to jump in as well. So so what if some aspects of our fears are actually true, I guess? And I think I'm coming kind of from a coaching psychology perspective here, but I think the first step is to acknowledge that fears can contain both valid and invalid elements, as we've mentioned with the thinking errors, and invalid fears often come from distorted thinking. But I do think we have to appreciate that often, I think I mentioned before, people can't just go into a role and be perfect at it and go straight up to leadership level with experience. Valid fears might point to real gaps in experience or knowledge, but recognizing this duality with it is essential, because then that can move us from being self-critical to self-awareness. So I think the cognitive reframing that we talked about, which isn't easy in itself, obviously, I know we've talked about these questions to ask yourself, and it takes time. Reflection is a real skill in a way. But for example, you could say a fact is, I'm new to this role. Your interpretation, if your interpretation is I'm incompetent and will fail, then that's likely to be some distorted thinking and not really accurate. But reframing it might sound like being new means I'm learning and competence grows over time. And that can hopefully move away from those feelings of anxiety, stress, which is where you have a lot of the negative outcomes and negative behaviors come from that, whether it's, like we said, overworking to compensate or withdrawal, and then it can open up space for growth. So I think we have to appreciate that we are developing skills as well, and still do some reality testing and action planning. It's not about denying reality, it's about reframing and planning and understanding ourselves and our strengths and where we can grow.
I might jump in also with a response. Thank you. I wish I knew your name, the human who asked this question. It's a really beautiful one. It's actually also covered in this material that we haven't covered. So I might quickly jump into the slides to answer the question for you. So what I wanted to share was a little bit about thoughts and beliefs and how we can find our way through those. And it's not easy work. I can hear that in a way in your question. And so sometimes this is why working with a coach or a psychologist can help to just filter and make sense of what's happening in the inner world. And so I'll just offer these 3 levels as a way that we can sometimes make sense and also unlock potential. So on the top level, it can be sort of surface level thoughts that might sound a little bit like what I've got written here. I'm a fraud. I need to be more. That praise is not real. And these are real thoughts that we have. It's also when the neuroception is on, it's detecting unsafety. But these thoughts often come from a belief that sits underneath, and they can be limiting beliefs that are also sometimes connected to our family conditioning or cultural conditioning. And they can be some things like this. I need to be useful to be worthy. Leaders are white men. I need recognition and approval from others. It's not written here, but I remember from the questions earlier, it could be something like, I'm not safe to receive praise. And so these can be alive within our bodies and minds that actually limit us. Sometimes we can identify these with journaling or with a coach or psychologist. But what sits underneath that, which you can also tap into, sometimes it's harder to find, are what I'd call wholeness beliefs. So these are things like, I'm worthy because I exist. I'm enough. I'm exactly where I need to be. My voice is needed here. I believe in my curiosity and learning. I believe in my ability to give this lecture series. It could be these kinds of things. And so sometimes filtering through with these levels can help. I wish I could say more, but we're kind of running out of time. So thank you so much for your beautiful question.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you, Lucy. Yes, we are just over time now. I've just put a message into the chat just to say that we will run over by just a few minutes. But if you do need to leave, we will be making this a shareable presentation afterwards, so you can definitely catch up on any of the sort of later discussions. But I thought it would be nice to include one or two more questions. So there was one here about sort of self-doubt and insecurity, and how that leads to overthinking. I was wondering if you've just got some quick sort of tips you can share on how to stop that whole process of overthinking that I think we can all relate to.
Do you want to go first, Lucy?
I can do. I think I have been an overthinker massively, still guilty of it, but I try to stop myself and not use my energy as much on it and realize there's things that you can't control. Sorry, the lights have gone out in here again. I think when you catch yourself spiraling, she was a sensor, I would say internally just pause and say this isn't helpful. And try and redirect to a constructive action. And again, it's not that easy when you are spiraling and you're overthinking about things, but I think you have to try and take control and try and shift perhaps from subjective worry to objective evidence. If you are struggling with your thoughts and things, then write down facts, speak to someone, give yourself time to evaluate if there was an event that triggered it, give yourself a reflection window of what you can learn and kind of give yourself your own feedback, close the loop. But of course, remain compassionate to yourself as well. And again, overthinking can be very normal. We do feel all these things, like I said, when transitioning to new situations where we're uncertain about things. I did my PhD on young people entering the workplace and found out about a concept called reality shock. And the expectations in the workplace are just not what young people were expecting when transitioning. So I think it's important to accept these things that we're uncertain about and don't always have control over. Jenna, do you want to add something there?
Yes, I'll just add something completely different just to add to it. That if there's an overthinking going on, that there can be this kind of a lot of mental energy that's happening in the body. And so we can access some of our other bodies, like our physical body or energetic body. And so a really good way to break the cycle of overthinking is to move the physical body in some way. And even if that's getting up, which I do in my room here, just get up and swinging your arms, or it could be going out for a walk, or it could be putting on a hip hop track and dancing in your office. Whatever it might be, this is a really good way of shifting the patterns of overthinking that are happening and even unlocking some somatic intelligence that may provide you with some solutions and insights.
Thanks both. It's great to finish with some really sort of concrete and practical tips. We are going to have to close now, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry, everyone, because I know there are more questions there, but I'm going to perhaps have a word with Jenna and Lucy and see if they might have some responses that we can include when we send out the links to the recording later on. So just wanted to say how grateful we are for all of your input today. This has been absolutely fascinating. And in my own role, where I'm talking to graduates entering the workplace, all the time, then this has been such a sort of a great way of explaining some of the feelings and some of the which can often offer a barrier to them moving forward positively. So thank you so much for all your expertise. I know we could have gone on for quite a while with the questions. I'm going to hand back over to Sharon now, and we'll just close in a few moments.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say a huge thank you again to you, Sarah, and to Lucy and Jenna, our panel members. That has been an excellent session where I have certainly learnt a lot today, and I've got some really good takeaways, so thank you. Thank you to all our alumni who've joined us today online. We will follow up, and if you've got any questions for us, Lucy, Jenna or Sarah, pop the Q&A, and we will do our best to follow up on all of those. Remember to stay connected with your global community for all the latest news, future events and opportunities to enhance your own networks. So thank you all and take care.